Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Today's episode is going to be titled, The Hypocrisy of Murder. One realization that's been growing clearer to me is this. People don't actually have a problem with murder, not universally, not consistently. What they have is a problem with who is doing the murdering and who is being murdered. This isn't just a cynical observation. It's something I first began to understand years ago, listening to George Carlin dissect the contradictions in religious morality. He pointed out, with brutal clarity, that the Bible never truly condemns murder in any absolute sense. Instead, it's filled with stories of people being slaughtered in the name of God, often with divine approval. Carlin's point stuck with me, because when you look at history, more people have been killed under the banner of religious righteousness than for almost any other reason. And yet, many of those killings are still rationalized, even celebrated, by believers who claim to stand for peace and justice. That contradiction isn't limited to religion. It's everywhere. If you ask someone whether murder is wrong, they'll likely say yes. But press a little further. Ask them about someone they despise, someone who threatens their values or beliefs, and you'll often find the answer shifting. Suddenly, murder becomes understandable. It becomes justified. It becomes necessary. This is the moral loophole people exploit. They claim to be against murder, but only when the victim is someone they care about or someone they believe deserves protection. But if the person being killed is seen as a threat, an enemy, or simply someone they dislike, the outrage evaporates. The moral compass bends. Of course, not everyone thinks this way. There are still people out there who hold firm to the principle that murder is wrong, period. No exceptions, no caveats, no moral gymnastics, and I respect those people deeply. Because that's what it means to actually stand for something, to hold a belief that doesn't waver based on convenience or emotion. If you're truly against murder, then it doesn't matter who the victim is. You're against it. Even if you hate the person, even if you disagree with everything they stand for, even if their existence offends you, that's the test of integrity. Can you uphold your values when it's uncomfortable, when it's inconvenient, when it goes against your emotions? Too often people fail that test. They cherry-pick their morality. They say, murder is wrong, but that guy had it coming. Or, I don't condone violence, but she deserved it. That mindset is corrosive. It doesn't just undermine the principle of justice, it warps our entire understanding of right and wrong. Once you start justifying murder based on personal bias, you're no longer standing against murder. You're standing for conditional violence. And that's a dangerous place to be. It's why I've tried to step back and look at the world with clearer eyes, to strip away the noise and the justifications and see things for what they are. Because if everything can be justified depending on who's involved, then we're not really against the things we claim to oppose. We're just playing favorites. I talked about this in a previous rant, how people today are masters of selective outrage. They'll BS you with moral platitudes, but when push comes to shove, their principles collapse. So I've made it a point to examine both sides of every issue. Or better yet, all sides. Because the truth rarely lives in the extremes. It lives in the uncomfortable middle. And what I've come to realize is this: people aren't truly against murder. They're against certain murders, the ones that don't align with their agenda. It's a form of moral tribalism. If someone they like gets killed, it's a tragedy. If someone they hate gets killed, it's justice. That's not morality. That's emotional bias dressed up as ethics. I saw this play out earlier this year when Luigi Mangione murdered healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Cold blood, no ambiguity. And yet, people applauded. They called Luigi a hero. They said he was brave. They celebrated the act as righteous vengeance. But let's flip the script. Imagine someone walked into their lives and murdered one of their loved ones. Would they still be cheering? Would they still call the killer a hero? Of course not. They'd be devastated. They'd demand justice. They'd cry out for accountability. And that's the hypocrisy. Murder is only heroic when it happens to someone else, someone they've dehumanized. But murder is murder. It doesn't become noble just because you dislike the victim. That's a truth people need to confront. You can't, well, technically you can justify murder based on personal bias. But you shouldn't. There are plenty of people I disagree with. Plenty I find repulsive. But I don't wish death on them. That's not a productive way to think about life. Disagreement isn't a death sentence. We need to grow up. This country, frankly, is emotionally stunted. The way people think, the way they react, it's childish. I interact with grown men and women who behave like toddlers. They throw tantrums when someone disagrees with them. They call for violence. They fantasize about revenge. And it's not just immature. It's dangerous. Because violence doesn't persuade. It doesn't enlighten. It doesn't build bridges. If your response to disagreement is violence or hateful rhetoric, then maybe you're not ready for the conversation. Maybe you're not equipped to argue in good faith. Maybe you're losing the debate and resorting to aggression because you've run out of ideas. That's not strength. That's desperation. We need to relearn how to disagree, how to argue without dehumanizing, how to stand firm without resorting to cruelty. Because if our values only apply when it's easy, when it's comfortable, then they're not values, they're preferences. And preferences don't build justice, they build echo chambers. So I'll keep saying it, murder is wrong, not sometimes, not unless, just wrong. And if you claim to stand against it, then stand against it always, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. That's what integrity looks like. That's what maturity demands. And until we embrace that, we'll keep living in a society where outrage is selective, justice is conditional, and morality is just another mask people wear when it suits them. Anyways, thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Signing out. Have a good one, guys. Goodbye for now.